Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk about such a crucial subject as the COVID vaccine. This is the greatest medical disaster to occur in the world in our lifetimes, probably in the last 100 years since the Spanish flu. The first thing you want to know about a new vaccine is three things. Do we really need to have a vaccine? Is the disease bad enough to warrant it? And in this case, the answer is absolutely yes. Today, the number of deaths passed 405,000, which is the number of American lives lost in World War II. We've now lost more people in less than a year than we lost in all of World War II. We definitely need a vaccine. We don't have good treatments for this. We've got slightly better treatments than we had at the beginning, but we don't have very good treatments. And the only way to stop this epidemic and get back to our normal lives is through a vaccine. The next questions you want to know, is this vaccine safe? Safety is the first priority. You cannot give a vaccine to potentially hundreds of millions of people without establishing that it's safe. So that's crucial. And I'll show you some information about that. And the third, of course, is does the vaccine work? It has to work at a certain level. We have some vaccines that work 50% of the time, some 80% of the time. And as I'll show you in a couple of slides, this vaccine works phenomenally well. So is it needed? Yes. Is it safe? Yes. Does it work? Yes. So let's look at some of the details. The next slide, please. Thank you. So we'll do a little bit of science first. These are called mRNA vaccines. That means messenger RNA. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how that works. You've probably heard of these. They're called the Pfizer vaccine and the Mrna vaccine. They are very, very similar in the way they work. One of the myths that's circulating on the internet and through Instagram and Facebook, etc., is that it has live COVID virus in it. That is an absolute myth. There is no live virus in either of these vaccines. They don't contain dead COVID virus either. I'll show you in a minute what they do contain, but there is no virus. You cannot get COVID from taking this vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine came out first. Its major problem is the storage has to be at 70 degrees below 0 centigrade, which many facilities do not have the ability to do that. The Mrna vaccine can be stored at normal freezing that we use in regular vaccines and then in refrigerators. So that's a big advantage for the Mrna vaccine over the Pfizer. They both work extremely well, as I'll show you in a moment. The next slide, please. And remember, there will be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions about anything that I'm talking about now. I would love to go back and forth with you now, but it would lead to a lot of chaos in the Zoom session. So I'll talk first, and then everybody can ask any questions they have later on. So how do these mRNA vaccines work? They're messenger RNA. They send messages into our body. The shot goes into our arms, into the deltoid muscle. And in the muscle, what's in that vaccine is a piece of protein that looks like what's called the spike protein. The spike protein, if you can see that picture of the coronavirus, all those red spikes sticking out of that virus, those are called the spike protein. That's what the virus uses to get into our cells and cause all the damage that it does. So the vaccine has a piece of protein that is not from the virus. It is not the protein from the virus. It just looks like it. It gets into the body, and our cells in our immune system look at this thing and say, this shouldn't be there. This is something foreign and it may cause problems. So the body decides to make antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that fight foreign substances like viruses and bacteria. So our body makes antibodies against this thing we're sticking in there. And it looks so much like the coronavirus spike protein that our bodies now make antibodies that know how to fight the coronavirus by mimicking what the spike protein looks like. Can you get COVID-19 from this vaccine? No, as I said before, there is no COVID-19 virus in this vaccine. There is no live virus of any kind. Another myth that has been circulating on the social media is that your DNA can get altered by this vaccine. That's absolutely not true. Messenger RNA does not cause any changes in DNA. So no one's DNA is affected. No one can get COVID-19 from this. One other common myth that's being circulated, which is also completely false, is that the vaccine includes a tracking device that will allow the government to follow all your movements. Clearly, that we know that is not the case. Someone had sent in a question in advance of how do we know this is true? And that's a very good question. We can't prove that it's true. You just have to say, why would anybody bother to do this when they can already track people by their cell phones, as Google and other organizations can do? But there is no tracking device in these vaccines. Next slide, please. Do these vaccines work? Absolutely, the answer is yes. Now, this is a very simplistic cartoon because I like things that are simple. They're easy for me to understand. The red line are the number of people in the vaccine group, and this is the Pfizer study. The Mrna study is very similar. The Pfizer study had almost 44,000 people in it. Half got the placebo and half got the vaccine. The red line is the vaccine group where they start to separate. That's 7 days after the first dose. So the lines are equal until 7 days after the first dose. What happens then is the placebo group continues to get more and more and more cases. The vaccine group, hardly any more cases. So although in many studies, statistics can be twisted often to say whatever the writer wants you to hear, these statistics cannot be twisted. Look at the vaccine group not getting COVID and look at the placebo group getting COVID. So the separation starts at 7 days, and the endpoint of this study was 4 months after receiving the vaccines. Next slide, please. So here's the detail of how effective are they. Both vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna, give about 95% protection, which means that for every 20 cases that someone in the placebo group gets, there's only going to be 1 case in the group that gets the vaccine. This is phenomenally active for any vaccine, probably the best protection we've had from any vaccine since smallpox. The next slide, please. So this is a more scientific look at that cartoon that I showed you before. You can see 7 days is where the line starts to separate. Frank, I don't know if you can use a pointer on your screen and show where that 7-day mark is, where things separate. But you can see the patients in the placebo group continuing to get more and more and more cases. Right, thank you. Placebo group getting more cases while the very few cases are added on in the group that got the vaccine. And the numbers I would like you to focus on, between the first and second dose, 82 people in the placebo group got COVID and 39 got it in the vaccine group. So the vaccine group was not fully protected between the first and second dose, but already there's some degree of protection. And it turns out that by 14 days or so after your first dose, you have a good amount of protection. Not great, but pretty good. 2 to 7 days after the second dose, 21 more patients in the placebo group got COVID, but only 2 more in the vaccine group, showing that there's really excellent protection within 7 days after the second dose. And the big numbers are what happens in the next few months after that. In the placebo group, 172 people developed COVID infection, but only 9 people in the vaccine group. That is a fantastic response. That's where the 95% effectiveness figures come from. The next slide, please. This is a little bit of a busy slide, but just to focus on the numbers in the 2 trials. Top trial is Pfizer. One below it is Moderna. Look at 43,000 in the first trial, 30,000. These are great numbers for studies. The FDA requires that you study at least 3,000 people to get a vaccine on the market. And in these studies, we looked at 43,000 and 30,000 in the other. And the final efficacy, Frank, if you can point at the column, says primary endpoint, 95% for the Pfizer, 94.5% for Moderna. Another very crucial thing is the people in the vaccine group who get COVID don't get very sick. In the Pfizer trial on top, there were 10 severe cases in the study. Only 1 was in the vaccine group, 9 were in the placebo group. In the Moderna trial, only 11 patients got severe COVID. They were all in the placebo group. Nobody who got vaccine got a severe case of COVID when they got it. Most were very mildly ill or asymptomatic, and nobody died. Next slide, please. Frank, thank you. Okay, so the next big question, so we know they work, we know we need it, are they safe? So we know that from previous vaccine trials going back many, many years, most serious side effects will occur within 6 weeks of vaccination. To be more cautious, the FDA requires 8 weeks for COVID-19 vaccines, and there's also ongoing safety studies for everybody who's gotten the vaccine. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, is watching for side effects. Everybody's signed up in a program where we have to submit any side effects to the FDA and let them know. So now we've got over 4 months of data from the trials, and we're building up data from all the people who've been vaccinated in the past couple of months since the vaccines were made available to us. It's going to continue. As I said before, the FDA wants a minimum of 3,000 people being looked at. In these 2 studies now, we've got almost 75,000 people who are being followed for side effects. No major side effects in the trial. The side effects are what you would expect to see from any vaccine or any shot. Some local irritation, some pain at the site where you get the shot. Some people get fever and chills, more so with the Moderna vaccine. Some people get a little bit lightheaded. And for some people, they just don't feel well for a day or 2. Most people don't have any serious side effects. You may have heard about something called anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is a major allergic reaction where you can have, I'm sorry, next slide, please. No, not that one. Go back to the side effects. Thank you. Anaphylaxis is when you have a major allergic reaction to something like penicillin, for example, where you have trouble breathing, your face can swell up, it can be life-threatening. This has occurred in 1 out of 100,000 vaccine recipients, compared to 1 out of 5,000 penicillin recipients. So penicillin is 20 times more likely to cause this. It's very rare and it's easily treatable, usually with a drug called epinephrine, which is available at every site. Can you please mute yourself if you're not speaking right now? Thank you. So the anaphylaxis is not a reason not to take the vaccine. If you have a major allergy to penicillin or any other antibiotic or strawberries or anything else, you can take the vaccine. The only problem would be if you're allergic to something called polyethylene glycol. That's a substance that's in this vaccine. We call it PEG, polyethylene glycol. It has not been used much, but if someone is allergic to that, they should not take this vaccine. Next slide, please. This is worth saying over and over again. You cannot get COVID-19 from this vaccine. A little bit of fatigue, headache, pain, chills, fever at the site. Maybe a day or 2, rarely for 3 days. Can you go back one? Thank you. More people have these side effects from the Moderna vaccine, and more people get them with the second dose. Now, many people feel that the side effects are a good thing. That's your body fighting off this substance that's been given in. It's your body making antibodies. And a lot of people I know are happy to have these side effects. And people like me, I've gotten 2 shots and I've had no side effects. After the second shot, I had a little dull ache in my arm, you know, something like a flu shot. but I'm concerned that maybe my body's not making antibodies, but it turns out that almost everybody does. But those side effects show that your immune system is at work and they're fighting. The recommendation is not to take ibuprofen or acetaminophen, which is Tylenol, in advance. But if you do get the side effects, it's okay to take either Tylenol or ibuprofen, which is the substance found in Advil and Motrin. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the most common. Again, these are the numbers from the Pfizer study and the Mrna study. They were a little bit higher than this. So they're expected, but they're not a problem. It's much, much better to get the vaccine and get these side effects than to risk getting a disease as horrible as COVID is. Next slide, please. One major concern of people who don't want to take the vaccine yet, or that the vaccine was developed very quickly. How is this vaccine developed this quickly? Well, several reasons. One is that the science in the world of studying viruses is amazing and far, far advanced than it has ever been before. After the first diseases were seen in Wuhan in China, the virus was identified as rapidly as 1 week. They knew exactly what the virus was and what its proteins are and how to go about trying to attack it. The whole world united in this effort to make a vaccine because it was quickly realized how bad this was going to be. Most governments and many drug companies poured in unlimited amounts of money, and the top scientific minds in the world of vaccines all got busy working on this vaccine. Tens of thousands of people, actually hundreds of thousands, volunteered to be in the studies, which is fantastic. And one other reason that the studies were done quickly was that so many people are getting coronavirus. If you do a study like this, but hardly anybody gets the disease, you don't know if it works. But sadly, coronavirus has spread so widely that many people got it very quickly, and that allows us to see quickly that the vaccine is clearly very, very effective. They have been working. Can you see the next slide, please? Okay, before we get to, I wanted to say that the people say messenger RNA is a new technology, and it is not. Products using this technology have been made for many years to treat various types of cancer. And also, it was worked on in 2003, 18 years ago, was the first SARS, the coronavirus that causes COVID, has two viruses. This is coronavirus 2, or SARS-2. The first one was also in the process of being worked on by messenger RNA vaccines. So this is not a brand new technology. It's new for an effective vaccine, but it's not a new technology. Tough question is, how long will we be protected by this vaccine? The answer to that is, we do not know yet. Okay, the Pfizer virus requires a second dose, a booster dose, which is 3 weeks after your first dose. The Mrna vaccine, 4 weeks after your first dose. They're working on many other vaccines right now, and one of them, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is only going to be 1 dose, but we're waiting for further studies to make sure that works. We know you get really good protection, some with the first dose and great protection after the second, but we don't know how long it's going to last. The studies are ongoing now. All the people who got it will be looked at to see how long their antibodies last. It may turn out to be a situation which is like the flu, where we have to get a shot every year to make sure we have enough antibodies. But again, we do not know the answer to this question yet. Next slide, please. Will we need to wear masks? Will we need to practice social distancing once we get the vaccine? And the answer to that definitely is yes. You cannot say, I got my vaccine, I don't need a mask, because there still will be some people in the vaccine group who get the disease, and they will be able to pass it on. Remember, you're wearing a mask primarily to protect other people from getting the disease, as well as providing some protection for yourself. So masks and distancing must continue until we reach something called herd immunity, which is when enough people in the country and in the world have received the vaccine that there's hardly any disease around, and no one's going to be spreading it at that point. But we're a long, long way from that. Next slide, please. The second dose is vital. If you got the first vaccine and you had some headache or some chills and you don't want to get the second one, that is a huge mistake. It is very important to get the second dose to make sure you get full protection. So in the studies, hardly anybody quit the study after the first trial. A tiny, tiny number of people quit before getting the second dose. And we should all strive to make sure we get the second dose. It is felt that you should get the same vaccine in the first and the second dose. In the United Kingdom now, in England, there's concern. They want to get everybody vaccinated quickly, that if they don't have the same vaccine to give you, they should give the other one for the second dose. That may work because they're both similar. They're both mRNA vaccines, but there's no studies on that. And since we don't have any scientific studies, it's really important to try to get the same vaccine as you got with the first dose. The next slide. Is it safe to get the vaccine even if you had COVID-19? The answer to that is definitely yes. It's important to get vaccinated. People who have COVID make antibodies themselves, but we know that after 3 months, those antibodies start to fade away. They may last in 5, 6, 7 months or longer in some people, but in many people, they're gone after 3 months. And that is why if you've had COVID, you should get vaccinated 90 days or 3 months after you've had the disease. So the answer, yes, you get it even if you have the disease, and you should wait 90 days. Next slide, please. This is a major, major concern, what we call vaccine hesitancy. People who are afraid to get the vaccine and don't want to get this. If enough people refuse to get the vaccine, we will never achieve herd immunity, and we will never get out of this mess we're in now where we can't go to concerts and movies and restaurants, and we sit around with masks all day long. We need to get enough people to accept the vaccine. It's a major, major threat to worldwide public health. The main reasons for vaccine hesitancy are twofold. There's two kinds of people, I feel. One are the people who are just anti all vaccinations. This is a large movement which has a very powerful public relations machine. They're all over the web and Instagram and Facebook, spreading horror stories about various vaccines. This started, as many of you know, years ago when a study came out showing that the measles vaccine caused autism. That study was proven to be completely false. The person who was the author of this study faked his data because he had another measles vaccine he was creating that he wanted to sell, and he lost his license. However, the damage was done. People believe this, and the word has spread about the danger of vaccines. These people want to make you feel that if you get a COVID shot, you're going to grow a second head or a third arm, or some other horrible thing is going to happen to you. This is simply not true. But these people, this group of people is very hard to convince by showing them the facts that they should be vaccinated. But a much larger group are people who are willing to get vaccines, but are concerned that this came out too fast and they want to see studies and more data. And that's a perfectly reasonable concern. Now, I've explained why it came out quickly and why it's safe, but I think that now we're going to have millions of people vaccinated, and over the next couple of months, that many people who think this came out too fast, they'll be ready in a couple of months. They'll see millions of people have gotten the vaccine, and the safety record should be very, very good. And I think those people will agree to start getting vaccine because it's just so important that we vaccinate enough people to make this work. The next slide, please. This is a particular concern to all of us. Right now, in a poll done of 2,000 American adults, in August, 69%, just over 2/3 of Americans said they would take the vaccine. But by October, that dropped down to 58%, just over half. Why would they change their minds? It's not clear. We're hoping the trend goes the other way very soon. But another major concern, if you look at the numbers on Black Americans, in August, about 2/3 said they would take it. But in the October poll, we're down to 43% of Black Americans who said they will take the vaccine. This is a grave concern. As you probably know, the vaccine has affected Black Americans and especially poor Americans to a much greater extent than white Americans. The poor people cannot go to their house in the country to wait this out. They cannot stay home instead of going to work at jobs that will expose them to the virus. So they are at greater risk for getting COVID. But also, they have had bad experiences with the medical system going back many years. There's a lot of mistrust of the government. A lot of it goes back to what's called the Tuskegee Study, which was asked about. Someone sent in an excellent question about the mistrust related to the Tuskegee Study. For those of you not familiar with it, this was the most unethical study in the history of American medicine. It's a disgrace to American medicine. It started in 1932. They took 600 Black men in Alabama. 400 had syphilis and 200 did not. And the study was to show what is the natural history of syphilis if we don't treat it. There was no treatment back then. But the horror of this study was that in the 1940s, when penicillin came along, everybody could have been treated for syphilis. This study, they decided not to treat anybody for syphilis. Instead, they wanted to see what happens if you don't treat syphilis. So these 400 Black men, plus in the 200 group, those who had gotten syphilis during that time, were never treated for syphilis. They never consented to the study. There was no informed consent in those days, and they were never treated for syphilis. Many of them went on to get horrible complications of syphilis and die. So it's not surprising that in 1932, Alabama, a study like this was started. What's horrifying even more is that the study went on for 40 years. It was not stopped until 1972, when the CDC realized that this was still going on and it was such a disaster. So although it's understandable that people will distrust this medical system because of this, you have to remember this happened many years ago. Many protections are in place now to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. The fear of the vaccine should be, is real, but the fear of COVID should be much, much, much greater than this. The next slide, please. Again, we cannot control this without the vaccine. We don't have the weapons yet. We don't have effective treatments. We have mildly effective treatments that may cut down on the deaths, but nothing that's reliable. Vaccine is our only way out of this. Next slide, please. You want to get good information, don't listen to your Uncle Ted on Facebook or your friend's cousin who said something on Instagram. Go to the CDC website. You just Google CDC COVID vaccine information. It's very reliable now. The CDC has recently been restaffed with a lot of the top people in the infectious disease world. And it's going to, once again, be a source of really, really reliable information about this. That's where you should be looking.